What is your full name, sir?
Bruce M. Smith.
Where and when were you born?
I was born in Waterloo, Iowa, on June 11th, 1919.
So how old are you right now?
I'm 97 right now.
Do you feel like you're 97?
I feel exactly 97.
What does that mean?
Well, that means my head is all right, but my legs don't work too good anymore.
What branch of the military were you in during World War II?
I was in the 183rd Field Artillery, and it was Idaho National Guard unit that I joined after I went to Camp Roberts, California for my basic training. And after Pearl Harbor, we went down to San Diego and stood guard around the telephone office because all the western states communications went through that telephone office. So then we went from there up to Long Beach, set up a gun position there, and was there for about a month, and then we went to from there up to Fort Lewis, Washington.
So I want to backtrack a little.
Okay.
What was the highest rank you achieved by the time you left the armed services?
I was tech sergeant.
And you said you were born in Waterloo, Iowa.
Right.
Did you grow up there as well?
Did I what?
Grow up in Waterloo?
You grew up in Waterloo, yeah.
Talk to me about your childhood. What kind of things would you do for fun as a small child?
Well, I was one of 4 boys. I was next to the youngest, and we did all the boys things, played all kinds of different games and stuff, and grew up then moved out on a small acreage out north of town, and we were there about 4 or 5 years, and then moved down on Rainbow Drive in Castle Hill in Waterloo, and I lived there until I went in the service. And I was drafted.
What was your father's profession?
He was an engineer on the railroad.
Was he in World War I?
No, he wasn't in World War One. I don't know the particulars on that, but
did he have a job during the Depression?
Did he? Yes. Yeah, he was. He always had work at the railroad.
What were the struggles your family faced during the Great Depression years?
What was what?
What were the struggles your family faced during the Great Depression?
Well, we were fortunate because my dad had a pretty stable job with the railroad, and so we didn't suffer like a lot of families did during the Depression.
Did your brothers also serve in World War II?
We all serviced at the same time. We were all in the service at the same time.
What branches were they?
They were, my oldest brother was in the Army in North Africa. My second brother was in the Navy. He was on a PT boat at the same time that President Kennedy was. I think he was in his squadron. I'm not quite sure of that, but and then my youngest brother was uh, in France. He landed in France, and as he was in the infantry. And at one time, I think I'm not sure about this, but I think our artillery unit was supporting his infantry, and just outside of St. Lowell. And
After you guys came home from the war, did you ever talk to each other about it?
some, it's not. I think we were trying to. Well, for one thing, I was in the hospital for 2.5 years, and he was in the hospital in Chicago. So, and I was in I was in El Paso, Texas, in the hospital there, and so, well, there was several years there we didn't even get to see each other.
Going back to you growing up, what were the first few jobs you had?
In the artillery?
No, growing up.
Oh, growing up, well, I was always interested in building houses, and so I got a job working for a plasterer one time when I was real young, 15, and he paid me 25 cents an hour, and I had to have everything ready when he got there, and that's when my time started. And my time stopped when he dropped the troweling tools and left the house, and then I helped a bricklayer finishing some chimneys after the winter, the ones that had been built in the winter time. And then I helped build a house with well, we built houses actually in high school. We got into a program where we actually built houses in high school, and that's where I learned the trade, and that's what I ended up doing the rest of my life was.
What high school did you go to?
I went to West High School in Waterloo.
And what year did you graduate?
38.
Did you go steady with anyone in high school?
Not steady. I went with my wife though for a year and a half after I met her, and we met at a roller skating rink.
What kind of things would you guys do on date nights back then?
Well, we did a lot of roller skating. We both liked to roller skate, and in the wintertime we'd ice skate, and we just hung out and did fun things.
And when you became a teenager, what kind of mischief would you get into?
Oh, this isn't going to be long enough to get I think mostly kid things, you know.
Like what?
Like throwing eggs at the cars and greasing the streetcar tracks so streetcars couldn't get up the hill.
Is there anything special you would do on Halloween?
Well, that's been a long time ago.
It's only 75 years.
85. Yeah. So, we probably soaped a few windows and that kind of stuff.
Knock any outhouses down?
Well, we tipped over a couple.
Now, how did you hear about the attack on Pearl Harbor?
Well, I was in the service when that happened.
So before that, then take me through why you ended up in the service.
I was drafted. I got a letter from Roosevelt saying that my friends and neighbors had selected me to go in the service for a year. That was before Pearl Harbor, and I checked with my friends and neighbors, and not a one of them said anything about wanting me to go into service. So, and then I was supposed to be in for a year, and ended up being in there 5.5 years. And
So this was the Iowa National Guard?
no, this is just a draft. I was drafted. I was a draftee.
So after you were drafted, where'd they send you to do basic training?
Well, Camp Roberts, California.
Take me through a typical day of basic training.
March, exercise. That's about it. And then I went into a regular Army. I was put in the regular Army unit when I first went into Camp Roberts, and then after that was I was in that was 164th Field Artillery I was drafted into, and then after basic training we went after Pearl Harbor we went down to San Diego, like I say, and then eventually went up to Fort Lewis, Washington, and I had signed up to be a glider pilot, and another fellow and I were transferred then to officers' quarters, and we sat there for about 6 weeks, and the 164th Field Artillery went to the Philippines, and then I was transferred into the 183rd, and because they quit taking people out of the service to fly the gliders.
How'd you end up as a forward observer? Was that something you did in training, or once you got overseas?
I got training in that, and when I got into 183rd, I went into the survey and communications, and then ended up as a assistant to the forward observer.
Take me through the training that you had to receive as a forward observer.
Well, it's oh golly, we have regular field trips. We would go over to Yakima, Washington, and we had an artillery range over there, and that's where I learned about how to fire the battery, and I had to know that, even though, and I also I drove the Jeep that the forward observer was in, and in case something happened to him, then I was supposed to take over and do what I could do. But we got most of our training in Fort Lewis, and Yakima is where the artillery range was.
So as a forward observer, how do you determine what would be a good target for the artillery?
Well, a lot of times it's visual targets, and but otherwise they we have to we go out and locate targets, or somebody would, maybe a patrol or something would, if there was what we would concentrate on was like supplies. If the Germans had a supply depot and we could hit it, they got fired on. And they use us in hedgerow country in France there, and that was probably the toughest part of the whole war, was after we landed in France until after St. Lo, after we broke through at St. Lo. Then we went up, bypassed Paris and went up to Belgium, and then we went through the Siegfried Line and into Germany. And that's where I was wounded, was in Germany after we got in there.
So once you find a potential target, what is the information that you relay back to the artillery batteries?
Well, if it was a visual target, we'd fire one, give a elevation and a range to the number one gun in our battery, and fire one round, and we could concentrate that round around that gun onto the target that we were after, and then we'd call our other guns in at the same time. So we just locate with one gun and concentrate with the rest of them.
And the only information they need is the elevation and range?
Direction, elevation, range, that's and when you fire on a target, you fire long and then fire short, and then you can get on the target that way.
That's bracketing.
Bracketing, right? Yeah. That's what they call it, bracketing.
How far away would you usually be from the artillery that you're calling in? Because you're obviously way ahead of the batteries.
Well, we were way ahead of the batteries, and sometimes we called it in really close. We could hear the shells going over before they hit the target. So probably a couple hundred yards, maybe.
You're calling in artillery only a couple hundred yards away from you?
Well, that's where the target would be, a couple hundred. In the hedgerow country, that's where the enemy was, a couple hundred yards away.
And is a part of your job to stay there and report back the damage done?
Well, I don't remember having well, we'd if the mission was accomplished, we radioed back, mission accomplished. So.
And in this survey team that's up at the front, how many of you are usually in that group?
Well, there's usually 4 or 5. If we were doing a survey, part of us would be getting the elevation, and part of us would be getting the direction. And you did that by triangulation.
What does that mean?
Well, you set up a baseline, and then you have your distance, your direction to the target, and the distance, and you do that by triangulation.
So before we get any further into this, take me through what city did you guys leave to get overseas?
We left out of Boston.
And was it on a troop ship?
Yeah, there's a ship that was second to the Queen Mary. And they tell me there's 15,000 on that ship.
Were you afraid of the German U-boats?
It took us 11 days to go from Boston to Scotland. And it zigzag course all the way over because of the U-boats that were out there.
So once you get to Scotland, what happens?
Well, we landed in Scotland on Christmas Eve in '43, and then we went we convoyed down then into England, and we were in England from Christmas time until June at various places in England.
What were you doing in England in that 6-month period?
Extensive training.
Meaning what?
Like we'd do a 10-mile forced march before breakfast in the morning. And a forced march is where you run 100 and walk 200, and run 100 and walk 200, and then you have breakfast. Yeah, that's.
Are there any other components in a field artillery group besides the gun batteries and the forward observers?
Oh, supply, of course. You need somebody to bring up the ammunition and the gas, and every unit has to be self-sufficient, you know.
So, take me through your memories of the build-up to D-Day. When you were stationed in England, did you know that there was going to be an invasion of France?
Well, they didn't. We knew we were over there for a reason, you know, but we didn't know when. We didn't know when that was going to occur until they told us we went down from where we were stationed down to Portsmouth, and we left. That's where we shipped out of. President Eisenhower came, or General Eisenhower at that time, came and gave us a talk, pep talk, before we boarded the landing craft, and went over to England then, and we landed in Utah Beach, which was not far from Omaha.
How many days after D-Day?
We was in there on my birthday on the 11th of June.
So D-Day plus 5?
Yeah, 6 was on D-Day. And it was D plus 5.
So they kept you on the ships, though, for those 5 days?
No, I think it was on the 4th. We left at night and went over across the channel. It was 20 miles, all that was, you know. And we landed. Actually, it was dark when we landed over there. We drove off into the water because they couldn't get us clear up to the shoreline. And so we drove off into the water, and when we got on land, where the airplanes were German airplanes were strafing the landing or the beach along there. So we got a taste of that right off the bat.
What was that like for you, taking on the enemy fire?
Well, it was kind of scary. My radio operator and I got underneath the Jeep, and we were talking, and it was really noisy, and the lieutenant heard us talking. He said, "Be quiet, they might hear you."
So, obviously you got there a few days after the invasion itself took place, but Normandy is hedgerow country.
Yeah.
So describe to me, as if I've never heard this before, describe to me what that means. What are the hedgerows?
Well, in Iowa, or most places, they have fences. What they did over in France was they piled the dirt up to about, maybe 5 feet high around the fields, and then they planted trees and brush on those to keep their cattle in the fields, and the Germans would dig in the back side of the hedgerows. They could see you, but you couldn't see them, and they could fire their rifles right from, they'd be laying on the ground in the back there, and you couldn't do anything about it, but stay out of sight if you could. Had one lieutenant was shot. He stood up with his field glasses, and a guy shot him right between the field glasses.
You saw that happen?
Yeah. No. Yeah.
What were the biggest difficulties when it comes to being a forward observer in the hedgerow country?
Well, the hedgerow country was a difficulty, and they would take advantage of that. And you're talking, we'd fight all day and maybe move 100 yards if we were lucky. And it took a long time to accomplish much distance, you know.
And what would the space be between the hedgerows? Usually, what's the distance?
Well, like a field in Iowa. You maybe there'd be 10 acres in there. It'd be a pasture or whatever whatever they use the land for.
Like how many football fields would you say?
Oh, one football field.
Between each hedgerow?
Well, some of them might be a little bit bigger than that. But.
And all four sides of the hedgerow have of the field have hedgerows?
Yeah, all four sides.
And
they have a gate and a lane. Usually they had lanes that they'd drive their cattle through and into the fields, shut a gate. You know, that's the way they kept them in there.
And so you being a forward observer, obviously you need to be close to the enemy to be able to find the targets. Are you in front of the American riflemen, or are you with the riflemen?
Sometimes, one time we got in front, and that was after St. Lo. We was had broken through and had pockets of Germans, and we went up to support one outfit, and the lieutenant, my lieutenant at that time was he didn't want to appear, I don't know, he didn't want to think he didn't, the people, his other officers didn't, he didn't want them to think he didn't know his stuff, and they sent us off, the three of us, and we were actually ahead of the infantry. We didn't know it until we got up to the top of a hill, and then they took us under fire with not so much ground fire, but
Mortars?
Mortar fire, and they chased us. We'd maybe run 60 yards and flop down, and here'd come half a dozen rounds, and then we'd change directions, go another half a dozen, 60, 70 feet or something, dive again, and we got clear back to where we was left from. And by then they'd had artillery on us too, and that was a bad day there. We dove into a hole, and the shell landed right next to that hole, close enough that my radio operator could put his hand in that crater that was next to it. It was that close. But luckily, the ground was soft and sandy, and the shell penetrated quite deep before it went off.
So, explain to me what it's like to experience a German artillery barrage.
Well, I don't know. You're just hoping that it doesn't hit you, you know. And the worst place you can be is in the woods.
Why?
Because you get the shells hit the trees, and you get tree bursts in.
What does that mean?
And then sprays of shrapnel down, and you're just as likely to get hit with a shrapnel as you are anything, you know.
So, like, what do you think about, when shells are going off all around you?
I guess I'm wondering, what in the world am I doing here? No, I don't know. You just hope that you come out of it alive.
How long would the bombardments usually last?
Well, half hour maybe, more. Sometimes more, sometimes less.
And if there aren't any foxholes available, what do you do for cover?
Well, you dig a foxhole. If you're on the ground, that's what you do. You grab a shovel and get down below the ground if you can.
So going back to hedgerow country, you talked about the difficulties, but how would you guys overcome the hedgerows? What were the tactics that you would use?
Finally, what they did was they put they built like a fork out in front of these tanks, and welded that on there, and they could run into the hedgerow and they could knock a hole in it.
The rhino tanks.
The tank could plow a hole through the hedgerow. After they got that done, it was a lot better.
So before the rhino tanks with the fork, what were the tactics you were using?
Well, just shoot if you see them, and that's about all you could do, because they were on one side and you were on the other. And
because the way you're describing it, when the Germans are dug in on one side,
yeah,
when the American forces would try to run across the field, I feel like they would just be shot up.
that's exactly what happened. We'd try to find a weak spot and make a penetration, and that's if we could get in on one side of the hedgerow and they were on the other side, then we stood a chance. But
when you were in hedgerow country, would you just call in artillery on a particular hedgerow?
No.
Why not?
Well, a lot of times it would be a little too close. You couldn't get. We probably got the more rounds in the backup German backup forces than in ground on the front forces on the front line, because of old trees and stuff. You could only get that shell in so close to you,
Were there any cases that you recall, from France into Belgium into Germany, a friendly fire from the artillery?
Our own fire? No.
Friendly fire.
I don't think I ever had any of that. I don't remember ever. We got bombed with our own bombers once, but
what happened?
that was just before the breakthrough in St. Lo. There was a road. We were in a wooded area on a hill, and the road kind of went around that hill, and then part of the road then went east to St. Lo, and they sent in the dive bombers first to mark a target for the B-17s, and the wind was blowing pretty bad that day, and the dive bombers bombed along the road there, because they were dug in pretty hard on the other side, and then they called for the B-17s to come, and there were just waves of those. As far as you could see, there was B-17s coming, and they opened their bomb bays and dropped the bombs right on us, because the dust had blown from the road over to where we were, and we had to call back to the battery to call back to England to tell them they're bombing short, and but that's when General McNair got killed. He got bombed with our own bombs.
Were there a lot of casualties in your unit from the bombing?
Yeah, not so much in our unit, but there was 16 killed that morning from our own bombs. I don't know how many wounded.
So can you talk to me about the importance of St. Lo?
Well, St. Lo, they decided to take a stand there, I think. We kind of broke through the hill or the hedgerow country, and they was taking a stand at St. Lo, and so we were set up, and we were shelling, and actually I think my brother was in the infantry unit that we were supporting. Our artillery was supporting his unit, I'm not absolutely sure of that, but I know he was wounded that day. And and then after the breakthrough, we really started to move out then, and we cut a lot of infantry was cut off from their units, and it just split them up, and that's and we moved into a gun position out on the other side of St. Louis because we were supporting. That's when we started to support Patton, and we moved in and moved right into must have been a company of Germans, and they actually had one of our guns. We were setting up our guns. They actually had that gun, and we had to take that back, and we did a lot of rifle firing that day, and machine guns, and I got the Silver Star that day.
At St. Lo?
Just outside of St. Lo.
So take me through in as much detail as possible, please. Take me through the incident that led to you receiving the Silver Star.
Well, what happened when we moved into that gun position, and they captured that one gun, and our major said sometimes field artillery's got to fight for their position, and so that's what we had to do. We got a 50 caliber machine gun off from one of our trucks and set it on the ground. We turned a German Panzer tank around with that 50 caliber machine gun, and I don't know if he shot the tank commander, got the tank commander's shot, or just what happened, but they were coming right at us, and we sprayed the front end of that tank with a 50 caliber machine gun, and they turned around, and that was a good deal.
How long was the firefight going on for before they gave up?
Oh, most all day, I think. It seemed like forever, because we were on one side of the hedgerow and they were on the other side, and they were in farm buildings, and I was behind the gate post, and there was it must have been a sergeant or something, and he'd point toward the side, and then somebody would run across and get on the other side of the hedgerow from where we were, and I cut the strap. It had like a shoelace or something on his wrist, and I cut that off, and and then I was waiting for him to point again, and I looked up the edge of the barn, and I looked right down his rifle barrel, and I flipped over, and a bullet hit right where I was laying, and then they threw a hand grenade over there where we were, and I picked it up, and I was going to throw it back, and I thought maybe that thing's, sometimes they hold them a while after they throw them, after they arm them, so you can't throw them back. And I thought about that, and then it was kind of in a ditch, a little depression, and I just laid flat on the ground, and it blew over the top of me. But then we got we captured, I I don't know how many of them. A lot of them. They gave up. Yeah. Well, they didn't have any ammunition or anything. I suppose it ran out, and there wasn't any coming up because had them cut off. So we captured a whole bunch of them that one day.
And how many of you were there?
There was 6 of us there at that point. Say, can you stop this? I gotta go.
Are you still in touch with anyone from your unit, or have they passed?
Well, we used to have reunions every year, but I haven't had any now for, I don't know how many of the guys are left. There's not many of them, I know that. But,
so, explain to me, after this action with the 6 of you guys against the Germans,
yeah.
So you took them all prisoner, the ones who surrendered.
Yeah, all we did was bring them back to the road, and they had people that took them back to camp or wherever they had them. It was someone else, not. We didn't take them. We just took them out to the road, and somebody else took them from there.
What did you feel like it was a big deal what you guys had just done?
Well, I was glad it was over. I know that for that part of it, but no, I didn't. I thought that was just part of the war,
So this is just outside of St. Lo, correct?
Yeah, that was at St. Lo. Yeah.
So when it comes to the fighting at St. Lo, sir, what was your role as an artillery observer? Because that was it was a town, St. Lo.
Yeah. Well, we just we were supporting the infantry, and when they needed firepower, like in St. Lo was one place where we had to fire on the church, because they had a forward observer in the church. The Germans they would do that, so that was one church we had to fire on. They hated to do that, but that's the way it was.
Do you have any other memorable targets that you guys picked out?
Oh yeah, many of them. I don't. Yeah. A lot of depot, German depots where they would have they'd bring their gasoline up to this depot, and then they'd send the trucks and the tanks would come in and gas up. If we could locate those depots, it was a good target for us. And what would happen, we had we get aerial photographs just about every day. You could pick out where they were grouping, getting together and everything, and that would be a target for you. And the depots were a prime target.
How would you distinguish a depot?
Well, by the trucks. A lot of times we'd have a aerial. They'd take aerial photographs, of the depot. You could tell what they were. You'd see by the kind of trucks that they were hauling gas in. with, you know, you could tell. So.
And take me through, after St. Lo, where do you guys go?
We went toward Paris. We didn't quite get into Paris, and that's when we were supporting Patton at that time. We didn't quite get into Paris, and then we turned north and went up. Oh, I don't know how many days it took us, but there was places where we had to stop and set up and fire on a road or something, and then move on a little bit more. It took us quite a while to get into Belgium, and we went then to Brussels, but the Germans had evacuated Brussels when we got there, and the Germans were all gone, and then we went through. After that, we went into through the Siegfried Line.
What are your memories of that?
Well, what had happened? Engineers had gone in there, and all the tank traps and stuff they had leveled off, and it was a lot of cement parts of tank traps and stuff laying around, you know, but we were able to drive our trucks and pull our guns through there. And then we went to Aachen, Germany, and then swung south to outside of a little town named Colonel Munster. And that was where I was wounded, was at Colonel Munster.
Take me through what happened, please.
Well, what happened was I had gone down to Fire Direction Center. I had to work there some nights and plot targets for the next day, and study aerial photographs and that kind of stuff. And we went down there and I worked one whole day down there. And when I came out, I was about 10 miles from my battery, and I came out, and there was I don't know if this is true or not, but this is the way I see it now. There was an old guy down there, and he had a dog on a leash. And when we left, he was standing right there. We had gone down this road, and got to a corner, and a shell hit right behind our Jeep. And a shell fragment came up through the Jeep, hit my shoulder, hit my neck, and took my 2 inches of my jawbone out. And the driver, my radio operator, was driving the Jeep and had knocked him out of the Jeep, and he had a piece of shell fragment in his shoulder, about the size of your thumbnail. It was not bad, but the concussion knocked him out of the Jeep, and I had to stop the Jeep, and he got in and he looked at me and drove right off in the ditch. He couldn't turn the wheel, and he ran up the road then to the aid station, and then they came down and loaded me in another Jeep and took me up to the aid station, put my arm in the cast and put some stuff over my chin and waited for ambulance to take me up to first evacuation hospital. And I went up there and got they set me on a table. It was a MASH, like a MASH unit, you know. Ever watch MASH?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's very realistic. And they set me on the table, and when they set me down, my tongue went down my throat, and I couldn't breathe in or out or make a sound, and the doctor was at the bed or at the cot across from me, and I reached over with my foot and kicked him in the butt, and he turned around and had a forceps in his hand. He reached down and got my tongue pulled out and stuck a needle through it and did a figure eight with some thread and tied it to my cast. So I was sitting there with my tongue hanging out, but he saved my life right there. I would have choked to death and nothing flat.
So how long did you recuperate for?
That happened on November 5th, 1944, and then I went from the evacuation hospital to a hospital in France, in Paris, and then 14 days later I flew over to a hospital in England, and I was there from latter part of November until April of 45, and then I flew back from there back to Presque Isle, Maine, was there overnight, flew from there to El Paso, Texas, and there I was for about 2.5 years. So, in the hospital there. So, got married there in the hospital. My wife came down. My wife now, she became my wife down there, and our first boy was born there. So that's how long I was in the hospital.
And was it mostly for your chin, or what was?
Oh, I don't know how many operations. I had a lot of operations, and they were time consuming. They could only do so much, and then I spent a lot of time going back and forth to Iowa from El Paso. If I had enough money to make the trip, so we'd go back and forth. Once we hitchhike home.
So, before we wrap up, I guess on your campaigns in Europe, were there any other memories that you wanted to talk about, or that you can recall?
Oh, no, I think I've covered about everything I want to talk about.
Mm-hmm. And just going back to your Silver Star citation, sir.
Yeah.
What was the firearm that you were equipped with?
What was the what?
The firearm that you were equipped with. Like, did you have anything?
Well, did I have a rifle, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a carbine rifle, and, well, at that time, I had a German Luger and a French 25 and a American 45 for pistols, and and a Luger and a carbine. So I.
God, a carbine's a small gun.
Huh?
It says in the citation that the 6 of you took on, it was 100 Germans.
Yeah.
It's a big deal.
Well, it was, but you see, when they started to surrender, they didn't realize how many of us. There was people not probably a quarter of a mile from us, from where we were. You know, they were fairly close. A lot of other people, and I think they just were concerned about their own livelihood, and they didn't care how many of us there were. They just dropped their guns because maybe they didn't have any ammunition. I don't know what the reason was.
And you said this whole ordeal, it was pretty much the entire day?
In a day, you say?
The whole incident, I mean, you said it took about a day for it all to happen?
Yeah, it took about a day. But there was a lot of activity during that day, and I think probably if they were just, maybe they didn't have anything to eat either, you know.
What were your guys' living conditions like overseas?
Well, I'll say one thing. I didn't have a bath from the time I landed in France. I didn't have a bath until I got in the hospital in Germany.
Really?
Yeah. From July, from the 11th of July, or 11th of June, until the 5th of November, no bath. The guy said, well, why don't you go to the river? And, well, there's people on the other side with rifles. You didn't want to go to take a bath in the river.
So, you were in the States when the war ended. What was that like for you to hear?
It was really good to be home, back in the States. And we flew down to El Paso, and I was in the hospital there. And the air base there had jet planes, and they'd go over the hospital, and about half of us would be under the bed. You know, it'd sound just like a shell coming in. And I'll bet you 2 months there, after we were in there, that it didn't scare the life out of you when they went over.
What was it hard for you to readjust to civilian life?
Oh, I think maybe being in the hospital for that long, being with the other guys, you know, the wards were full of people that were being patched up, and I think that helped, because you could talk about it to them, you know, and I think that helped us adjust.
Is there anything that the hospital staff would do to boost the wounded warriors' morale?
Well, one time the officer, I think he must have been a regular Army officer, came in the ward and said, tomorrow morning we want you guys to fall out. We're going to have calisthenics in the morning. Well, a bunch of us went to the bowling alley instead. So that was the last of that. They didn't ask us again. What are they going to do to you? They can't throw you in jail.
What is some life advice that you want to leave for future generations?
Well, oh boy. Enjoy the peace. That's the main thing, and enjoy and protect the peace. That's what we've got to do. Because you can't shoot your way into happiness, you know.
If you were to give me some wisdom for my life, what would you tell me?
What was that?
If you were to give me some wisdom for my life, what would you tell me?
Keep doing what you're doing. You're doing a good job. You got a wonderful attitude, my friend.
What do you want to say to your buddies who died overseas in World War II?
They should be getting the honor instead of me. They're the heroes. They're still there.
Did you lose quite a few close friends overseas?
Yeah, quite a few. Yeah. And a lot of them were wounded. And they're all, most of them that were wounded are dead now.
Mr. Smith, how do you want to be remembered? As what kind of person?
As a good dad. Friend, a good dad.
Aren't you forgetting war hero?
Huh?
Aren't you forgetting war hero?
Oh, I don't feel like a war hero. I feel like I kind of represent a whole lot of people that aren't getting attention. I'm getting too much attention for me, I think.
Do you have any last words?
Yeah. Have a good life. Yeah. Enjoy your life. Thank you, sir.
No, thank you for your time. Thank you for your service. I enjoyed it.
Well, yeah, it's something I couldn't rehearse. I've thought about things just today that I haven't thought about for a long time. And I just soon let it go, you know. But I know there's a lot of guys out there that did at least as much as I did and aren't getting any credit for it. And
well, that doesn't mean you don't deserve any credit.
Huh?
That doesn't mean you don't deserve the credit.
Maybe. I did what I was supposed to do. So, if everybody, a lot of people ran away from the draft, you know, and that makes me kind of sick. But one of them was the president at one time.
Well, no matter how upset you feel about the younger generations, you should always know that you've given everyone that's alive today a chance at life, you know? Because if it wasn't for guys like you on the front lines.
Yeah. Well, I hope they never have to do it. You're not supposed to kill each other, you know. But when you're on the spot and somebody's shooting at you, you don't have much choice, you know. You gotta shoot back. And the last guy standing is the best shot.
Thank you again
Yeah.
for everything.
You bet. Yeah.